Howdy folks, back with the Miata again today. We have got an install for you guys. Should be fairly simple. We're going to be installing an oil temp sensor. It is a GM coolant temp sensor, but it will actually also work for oil, and we're going to be installing it into a glow shift sandwich plate that goes between the oil filter and the oil filter housing on the block. The car is currently NA, so my oil temps aren't probably really going to be getting very hot, but eventually when I do track the car and turbo it, those oil temps are going to be getting up there. And if your oil temps get too high, the oil will thin out and it will not lubricate your engine components properly. When you're not lubricating the parts properly, you run into all kinds of issues. Basically, all I have to go off of right now is the engine coolant temp. And that can sort of give you an inkling about where your oil temps are at, but it's better to have the actual number itself. Of course, the hope is when I do get this car on track and turbo it, that my oil temps don't rise too much. If they do, I'm probably gonna have to put in an oil cooler. Thankfully, there's lots of kits out there for that, but having this data of oil temperature is gonna let me know whether or not we need to do that. So without further ado, let's get this car into the garage, up on jack stands, and start draining some oil.
We interrupt your regularly scheduled broadcasting to inform you about Eli's other documentation. He has 2 forums up on miataturbo.net, one of which outlining the details of his entire Miata project. The second of which is a tutorial on how to build a DIY canvas gauge using a Megasquirt and a Teensy 4.0. Check these out if you're a nerd just like him. Link is in the description. This is not advice. If you follow it, you may blow up your engine just like Eli will.
Alright, so basically, there's 2 ports on top of the sandwich plate. I'm pretty sure those are for like an oil cooler or something. Send your lines out. There's a port right there, and these are all MPT threads. So they get narrower as you get deeper. They recommend using some Teflon on the threads to seal it up, but I'm just going to use some RTV, good old Honda Bond. It's the good stuff. And I am going to block up 3 of these ports. The 4th one will be for the oil temp sensor. Just go ahead and thread that in. And then I'll tighten it down with a wrench. We'll do the other 2. Finally, we will get the sensor installed. Again, just a little bit of RTV on that, just so it seals up good. I'm going right in this back port. So this port faces the back of the engine. It'll make it easier to run my wiring harness back through the firewall. So just get it in there, start to thread it on slowly. And you can see it poke out into the housing there. And that's right where we're going to be getting our oil temps from. Finish snugging this up, and then we will put some oil on this seal, press it on the block,
and then screw this on to tighten it down. Put the new oil filter on, fill the car back up with oil, and make sure we have no leaks. All right, so I got the sandwich plate in with the sensor installed. This is the lead coming from the sensor. I'm gonna send it back down through that second grommet on the left there. Unfortunately, I did have to pull the intake manifold support brace off in order to get the filter on. The sandwich plate basically pulls the filter out a little bit away from the block, whatever the thickness of the plate is. And that support brace was just getting in the way. I almost could get the filter started, but not quite. So I unbolted the 3 bolts, 2 on the top, 1 on the bottom. They're all 14s. Didn't even take the bottom one out the whole way, just loosened it, and then I was able to pull the brace away a little bit from the block, slip the filter in there, get it screwed on tight, and put the brace back on. So now I'm just going to fill it up with oil, run it for a little bit, make sure we have no leaks, then I'll get the car back on the ground. We'll work on getting the wiring back to the Megasquirt and get it set up in Tuner Studio. All right, so I've now gotten to the point where I ran a coat hanger through the bulkhead down there. It turns out that that little guy on the left here is not a grommet. It is a stud on the inside. So I pushed a coat hanger from the inside of the car through this bulkhead. You can kind of see that hanger hanging out down there. It's pushed up through the footwell. And I'm just going to go ahead, spray a little bit of silicone on the rubber of the bulkhead to make this a little easier. And I'm going to pull this wire the whole way through. Got to do a little bit of disassembling. I got to take apart the floorboard so I can tuck the wire under the carpet and send it to the Megasquirt behind the seat. Okay, all that's left to do now is peel back this carpet, find our options connector, ECU here, and solder in one of the wires from the temp sensor into the black ground, and then solder the other one into the lead that I already wired up to the Megasquirt for the input for the oil temp sensor. So I have got the red wire soldered into the options connector that connects up to the middle plug here on the Megasquirt and connects to that blue wire, which I have sent to a 0 to 5 volt general input, and then that yellow wire is tied into one of the sensor grounds on the Megasquirt harness. So we're going to go ahead, plug everything back in, and then hop into Tuner Studio. All right, so we are here in Tuner Studio, and we just got to do a couple things to get this oil temp sensor set up. So I'm plugged in here to my laptop from the serial output on the Megasquirt. I got my key in the on position. We're going to go over to Advanced Engine, Generic Sensor Inputs. Look through my sensors here. We'll go to ADC 12, which is EGO2, which is the pin on the Megasquirt that I wired this sensor to. It's a spare 0 through 5 volt sensor. We'll go ahead and name it Oil
temperature. Gonna make it linear. Actually, we can just use the GM calibration here, and that'll have us all set up. Go ahead and burn it, close, and then it says we need a power cycle here, so we're just gonna key the car off, key it back on, and then I'm gonna go ahead and change this gauge to my oil temp, and we are reading 21 there. I believe that's 21 degrees Celsius.
So we have an issue here. The temp sensor that I'm using is a thermistor style 2-wire temp sensor, which means that these 2 wires extend into the probe that touches the actual oil, and there is a variable resistor between the 2 wires. As the oil heats up and cools down, this resistor will resist electricity either more or less, and that amount of resistance can be equated to a temperature. In our case, this calibration curve follows the GM coolant temp sensor calibration curve, which makes using it in Megasquirt very simple. But in order to get resistance readouts out of this sensor, there needs to be some amount of voltage flowing through the wires. In our case, it needs to be 5 volts of electricity. Thankfully, on the Megasquirt, there is a 5-volt output that is used to run the TPS sensor exactly in the same way that this temp sensor runs. So all we have to do is make a little jumper that runs from the sensor input wire coming from the oil temp sensor that connects to this 5-volt reference. That way we have 5 volts running through the sensor, and as the oil heats up and cools down, the thermistor will be able to resist this electricity more or less, telling us exactly what the temperature is. This is going to be reason 1 why you should never trust me and always do your own research.
All right, so we are back. Turns out I didn't have any extra resistors that I could have used, but through the power of Amazon, we've got 100 here just a day later. All I'm gonna do is make up a little jumper harness here. So it's basically just gonna be some of this scrap wire with one of these resistors right in the middle. I'm just gonna solder it into the middle of the wire there, probably clip the ends off, make it a little shorter, a little cleaner. And then we'll be able to take these little T-taps, one on either end, boom, boom, and we'll be able to connect this end to the sensor input wire that goes into the Megasquirt, and then this end into the 5-volt reference that comes out of the Megasquirt. Then we'll actually try to test it and see if the temp gauge works. If you can remember, here is our 2 wires coming from the oil temp sensor. This red wire goes to the options port here that connects up to the blue wire here, one of my spare ADCs, and that is the sensor in wire, and then the yellow wire is connected to a sensor ground. So based off that diagram I showed you guys, all we have to do is jump off of this sensor input wire and get it jumped to this gray wire over here, which is the 5-volt reference wire that actually runs the TPS sensor in the same way that the oil temp sensor will work. So we'll just take our little jumper, get it spliced in, and then hop into Tuner Studio. All right, so we're back here again in Tuner Studio, our second attempt at this. That resistor is all wired up now, so we should be operational. Let's see what this does. Just got the key on right now. I'm gonna send those settings. I was doing a little bit of tuning offline. Well, I mean, we have some fluctuation here. All right, sorry. Every time I turn the car on, it connects to Bluetooth and stops the recording. But we're going up, 70.9, 71. Come on, keep going, oil temp. 71.6. I think it's safe to say we've done it. Looks good to me. We'll just use it, like I said, to keep track of oil temps. As we drive, see where those get to, make sure we don't need to put it in an oil cooler anytime soon. And yeah, that's gonna do it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the little video tutorial sort of thing. Maybe you want to try this for yourself. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. I'm by no means a professional. I look up how to do all this stuff online. You guys saw I had that little mishap where I completely didn't know that I needed a pull-up resistor for the sensor, but we got it fixed, we got it sorted, and we are operational. See you guys in the next one.